Operation Crusader was not shaped by machines alone, and it cannot be understood simply by counting tanks on each side. It was also shaped by three very different commanders, each carrying a different burden into the desert in November of 1941. Erwin Rommel commanded the Axis forces around Tobruk and along the frontier, with a reputation for speed, nerve, and sudden counterattack. Claude Auchinleck, the British commander in the Middle East, carried responsibility for a vast theater that stretched far beyond one battlefield. Cunningham, newly placed at the head of the British Eighth Army, had to turn a complicated plan into action against an opponent who thrived on disruption.
Rommel had already become the central figure in the Axis Desert War, though the later legend of the Desert Fox can make him seem cleaner, simpler, and more infallible than history allows. He was bold, highly active near the front, and unusually willing to seize opportunities before the full picture was clear. That aggressiveness could unbalance opponents, because British commanders often found themselves reacting to what Rommel seemed about to do rather than what he had actually done. Yet his style also carried danger. A commander who moved fast and trusted his instincts could create battlefield shock, but he could also outrun supply, misread an enemy's resilience, and mistake motion for decision. Rommel's strength in armored warfare was not that he worshipped tanks as independent wonder weapons. His best successes came from combining mobile armor with anti-tank guns, artillery, reconnaissance, and fast command decisions. Again and again, British tank units found that chasing panzers could lead them into carefully placed German gun lines. Rommel understood that a tank battle could be won by refusing the simple tank duel and instead forcing the enemy into a layered fight. His panzers were dangerous, but so were the guns that waited behind them, the reconnaissance units that found openings, and the command rhythm that allowed Axis formations to shift quickly across the battlefield. By the time Crusader began, Rommel's position was both strong and fragile. He had Tobruk under siege, but he had not captured it. He had mobile forces capable of punishing British mistakes, but he also depended on long, strained supply lines across the Mediterranean and the North African coast. His army could strike hard, but it could not afford unlimited losses. This mattered because Rommel's command style often pushed the campaign toward dramatic moments, where a daring move might create victory or deepen the crisis. In a desert campaign built around fuel, repair, ammunition, and distance, even a brilliant tactical movement could become dangerous if it did not serve the larger operational problem. Claude Auchinleck faced that larger problem from the British side. He had replaced Archibald Wavell after earlier failures, and he inherited not just troops and plans, but the need to restore confidence in British command. Auchinleck was commander-in-chief in the Middle East, which meant he was not only thinking about Tobruk and Cyrenaica. He had to consider Egypt, the wider Mediterranean, imperial communications, the security of the Middle East, and the pressure from London for visible success. His responsibility was strategic before it was tactical. He had to ask not merely how to win a battle, but how much risk the theater could bear. Auchinleck was not the kind of commander who can be reduced to a single dramatic image. He was serious, intellectually careful, and conscious of the scale of the war beyond the immediate front. He understood that Operation Crusader had to do more than lunge toward Tobruk. It had to break the Axis siege, defeat or dislocate Rommel's army, and create conditions for a broader recovery in North Africa. That required patience and persistence, but also a willingness to accept confusion without abandoning the offensive too early. In that sense, Auchinleck's real test would come when the battle looked least like the plan. Cunningham entered the story with a very different background. He had won respect for his successful campaign in East Africa, where British and Commonwealth forces had defeated Italian armies across difficult terrain. That record mattered, and it helps explain why he was trusted with Eighth Army. But the Western Desert was a different kind of war. It was faster, more fluid, more dependent on armored coordination, and more vulnerable to sudden reversals. Cunningham was not being asked simply to command brave troops. He was being asked to manage a mobile armored campaign against Rommel, while holding together corps, divisions, brigades, supply columns, and a plan spread across enormous distances.
Cunningham's challenge was made harder by the nature of 8th Army itself. This was a newly formed Army headquarters, and a new headquarters is not instantly a smooth instrument just because it has a name. Staff routines, communications, reporting habits, and confidence between commanders all had to function under pressure from the first day. 30th Corps, with the famous 7th Armored Division, was expected to drive toward the decisive ground around Sidi Rezegh and El Adem. 13th Corps had to deal with the frontier positions. The Tobruk garrison also had its own role, preparing to break out when the time came. That meant Cunningham had to coordinate not one blow, but several moving parts across the desert. The contrast between Rommel and Cunningham was not simply boldness against caution. It was a clash between a commander already practiced in the rhythms of desert armored war and a commander trying to direct a major offensive with an army still settling into its own structure. Rommel's system often worked by quick reaction and local concentration. Cunningham's plan required synchronization, and synchronization is harder than reaction when reports are late and units are scattered. If one armored brigade was delayed, if one infantry formation met stronger resistance than expected, or if headquarters misunderstood where the enemy armor had gone, the whole operation could begin to lose shape. Crusader would expose that problem almost immediately. For listeners following the campaign without a map, it helps to imagine 3 levels of command pressure happening at once. At the front, tank crews and infantry battalions were dealing with dust, fire, breakdowns, and the immediate problem of survival. At Army headquarters, Cunningham had to decide whether the offensive was succeeding, stalling, or collapsing based on incomplete and often contradictory information. Above him, Auchinleck had to judge whether to trust the operation's original purpose even when the first reports looked alarming. Rommel, meanwhile, was trying to read the same chaos from the Axis side and find the moment when a counterstroke could turn British confusion into defeat. This is where command style becomes part of armored warfare itself. Tanks move quickly, but commanders do not automatically understand quickly. A formation can advance many miles, while headquarters remains uncertain about what that movement means. Radios help, but they do not remove confusion, especially when units are dispersed, signals fail, dust hides movement, and enemy reports are exaggerated or delayed. The commander who keeps nerve under those conditions can sometimes turn a messy situation into success. The commander who loses confidence too soon can cancel an operation that is still recoverable. Crusader became a test not only of armored brigades, but of command endurance. Rommel's greatest advantage was his ability to make the British feel that the crisis was always immediate. Even when his own situation was strained, his sudden movements could create the impression that the Axis army had seized control of the campaign. That mattered because fear at headquarters can travel faster than tanks. A thrust toward the frontier, a report of enemy armor in the rear, or the collapse of a formation around Sidi Rezegh could seem to confirm the worst possibilities all at once. Rommel did not need every move to be perfectly planned to create danger. His tempo itself became a weapon, especially against opponents still learning how to interpret the desert battle. Yet Rommel's gifts did not guarantee victory, and the British commanders were not simply passive foils in his story. Auchinleck's importance would become clearer when the campaign reached its darkest moment, because he was willing to continue when stopping might have felt safer. Cunningham's uncertainty under pressure was real, but it also reflected the immense difficulty of commanding a sprawling armored offensive before the British Army had fully mastered that kind of war.
The story should not be turned into caricature. Rommel was aggressive, but not magical. Auchinleck was cautious, but not timid. Cunningham was under strain, but he was facing one of the hardest command problems of the Desert War.
Operation Crusader therefore began as a contest between armies, but also between command habits. Rommel trusted shock, movement, and the chance to unsettle his enemy. Auchinleck trusted the larger purpose of the offensive and understood that the siege of Tobruk could not be broken by hesitation. Cunningham had to carry the burden in the middle, translating strategy into battlefield control while the desert pulled his plan apart. In the history of armored warfare, this is one of Crusader's lasting lessons. Tanks may dominate the image of the battle, but the outcome turned on the minds directing them, the staffs trying to track them, and the ability of commanders to keep fighting through confusion long enough for scattered action to become operational result.